Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name's Jim Brown, and thanks for being with us today. Get ready to experience something wonderful. We have some significant guests in the room today, and I want to begin with a big thank you to the 6ABC team and Bernie Prezenica. For those of you who don't know, this setup is not something that just appeared this morning. The team has been working on this for some time, and I want to give Bernie a little bit of attention. I think many people in the room understand the dynamics of what 6ABC does from a community standpoint in the marketplace, and there's no doubt in my mind the reason they're number one has a lot to do with the little things. And for those of us in the audience today, we can see that in action. We also have some distinguished guests from New York City in today from America Media, and they're going to have a delightful conversation with Father Robert Hagan, one of my all-time heroes. Father Rob. And we're going to focus on the significant story of Father Bill Atkinson, and there's a gift bag underneath your seat. It talks a little bit about his life story, and one of the other highlights of this morning is we have Father Peter Donahue, who is the president of Villanova University. He's going to come up and reflect for a few minutes after we kick off with a nice song. And the beautiful thing about that is I think we all know that life's about relationships and the impact we have on folks around us. And trust me when I tell you, it's wonderful to have Father Peter here today, because not only he but Father Rob have some pretty compelling history with a man who is in line for being named a saint. For those of you in the room that don't know, there are only 12 American saints in the history of our Catholic faith. And Father Rob is in a process, or Father Bill rather, is in a process right now for review in terms of sainthood. So it's a pretty significant morning. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce a couple folks that are going to take us along with the song, put us in the right mood. To my left, we have Olivia Currier, who is a sophomore at Villanova University, and my recommendation to the room is get this young lady's interview or autograph before you get out of the building. She is that talented, and you'll see that in a minute. I love the tune that she selected to sing for us. We were going to go with the national anthem, which is standard fare, let's say, but as always, Olivia came up with an idea to kind of modify our start, and she dragged in Joey McGowan, who is storied in his own way, but we won't dive into that today, Joe. We'll just let the music speak for itself. So without further ado, you're on.
My heart at no other home. Let these hands lift no other crown. Let these knees fall on no other ground. Draw these eyes from the gold that won't shine. You turn this life from water to wine. And I tremble, in your presence, in your presence. My breath with every starry night. You draw your power in downtown city lights. You were higher than the tallest of the hills, stronger than the walls we try to build. You blind me with the beauty of your face. You hold me close with your divine embrace. You speak to me with healing in your words and fix the things I didn't know were hurt. And I tremble. take the place of, and what compares to your love, for everything that you've done. To you alone we praise. You invented all of time and space, called the morning and midnight into place, tamed the power and tamed the wildest seas, and still you set your holy eyes on me. I will always live in wonder of the fact that I await your jealous love. Eternity will almost be enough. Eternity will almost be enough. And I tremble in your presence, in your presence. Lord, I tremble in your presence, in your presence.
Wow, that is amazing. And we're going to take the equipment and move it off to the side. So if our entertainment would drift down the aisle here. By the way, guys, did I oversell that, or do we think that was a home run? That was a home run, right? It's amazing, and it's also, and I see a lot of it at various universities in our city, not only Villanova, but LaSalle, Temple, St. Joe's, Drexel. I'm very dialed into relationships with people that believe that our faith is a key element of their existence, and it's fun to see that enforcement. And the folks in this room, I'll say, kind of walk that walk. They don't just talk about it, which is pretty significant. It's wonderful. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Father Peter to step up here. I'm going to get away from the microphone and allow him to give us a little reflection on Father Bill Atkinson. And I want you guys to think about this as Father Peter speaks to the room. We're talking about Father Bill Atkinson and the possibility of him being named a saint. And Father Peter has some significant history around that subject matter. So without further ado, Father.
I think my significant history is being around Father Bill, not being a saint. So. I had the privilege of taking care of Bill. I was a young seminarian, and it was in 1973. I came from the novitiate back to Villanova to continue studies, and Bill was at that time finishing his college studies at Villanova. After his accident, he was in a tobogganing accident and severed his neck and was a quadriplegic from that point on. The community was responsible for taking care of him. So the various young men that lived with him learned how to care for him. Bill could do absolutely nothing for himself, so he was completely dependent upon other people. And during the years I got to know him, it was amazing. Not once did he ever say, "Why me? Why did this happen to me? What about, why am I in this situation?" Bill was always an individual that was always interested in other people and making sure that other people understood what their calling was in life, how they could use the gifts that they had to really further their own life and the life of people around them. Bill was a person, I think Bill would probably be the last person to say I'm a saint. He was a very humble individual, but he was also very practical. He was also an individual that really used his gifts of conversation. He was a great conversationalist. He could sit and talk to people for hours and about all kinds of subjects. He was a great lover of sports. I was not. And he used to rail all the time about how I needed to get more in touch with the sporting world. And I was like, I'm fine, Bill. Don't worry about it. But one thing I always knew about him was I had the opportunity and the great privilege to be with him when he was given permission by the Vatican to be ordained. And going through the preparation of his ordination ceremony, his first Mass, And it was a challenge. He was the first quadriplegic ever to be given permission to be ordained a priest. And so there was a lot of things about that had to be covered and taken care of, and there was always a sense of Bill's humbleness in the whole process. He literally heard from people around the world. He received thousands and thousands of letters. Email was not popular at the time, but handwritten letters, and Bill responded to every single one of them. He had people writing letters for him, returning. He made sure that everybody that wrote to him and congratulated him, that they got a personal message from him. And I think the biggest thing I learned from Bill was his ability to be appreciative for what was given to him. As I said, there was nothing that he could do for himself. And there wasn't one time in my life, in my experience with Bill, that after the littlest thing, from scratching his head to blowing his nose to feeding him to doing anything for him, that he wouldn't make sure to say thank you. And I think that's the one big lesson I learned from Bill, is to be appreciative for the people in your life and to be willing to say thank you.
Thank you, Father Peter. That's it's amazing that you had that time with such a generous man. A little known fact, maybe in this room, but as Father Bill was going through his struggles, his brother was a super duper football player, played with the New York Jets. Joe Namath was the quarterback of the team that won the Super Bowl. His brother was the captain of the defensive team that year. And there are articles and video where reporters would thrust a camera into that linebacker's face and say, "You're the greatest guy in the world," and he would say, "Not really. Give me a minute. I have a brother who's the greatest. I have a brother who's the greatest guy in the world." And think about that. That his brother, with all the notoriety, had the presence of mind to shift the focus. I wonder what would happen today, Father Peter, in the world of, what would you call it, social media, how different that would have been received. But without further ado, I'm going to throw the morning over to our friends from American Media. For those of you who don't know, Zach and Ashley are outstanding young Catholics who have great conversations about the ups and downs, the good days and the bad days of our Catholic faith with true integrity. And many people in the room know this about Father Rob, but I'm just going to reinforce it. I think Father Rob has a gift, an exceptional gift, to be able to frame things on a sunny day and a rainy day in a similar fashion, and that's a rare human talent that I witnessed in Father Rob. And when we were invited to Villanova the day that Father Bill's body was moved from the cemetery to the Villanova campus, it was really striking to me that Archbishop Perez noted in his remarks, hey, maybe one day we'll be in this church celebrating Father Rob in some special way. It was a really terrific moment. Yeah, I know. Anyway, without further ado, yeah, you guys are on.
Thanks so much, Jimmy. Good morning, everyone. My name is Zach Davis, and I'm one of the co-hosts along with Ashley of Jesuitical. Jesuitical is a podcast that's produced by America Media, which is where me and my colleagues work. If you don't know, America is a national Catholic media organization published by the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, if you're not familiar. We cover the Catholic Church in our world today. We say that we try to explain the church to the world and the world to the church. And on our podcast, Ashley and I started this during Lent in 2017 when we were younger. We made a podcast. We tried to make a podcast for young Catholics. Ashley and I were not experts in Ignatian spirituality, in theology, but we just try our best to live out our Catholic faith every day. And we love talking to people who are doing that in exceptional ways. So delighted to be here with you, Father Rob. We are recording this for the podcast, so we may cover some ground that's already been covered this morning. So if we do that, bear with us, but we promise we'll keep it moving. So I'll hand it off to Ashley.
All right. All right. Hello, and welcome to Jesuitical, a podcast from American Media for saints and sinners. You can join us each week for honest conversations about the Catholic Church and our world today, sometimes over drinks. I'm Ashley McKinless, and I'm joined by Zach Davis.
Great to be with you, Ashley.
Great to be with you. And we are so excited to be joined by Father Robert Hagan, live in front of a studio audience here at 6 ABC in Philadelphia. Father Rob is the Prior Provincial of the Augustinian Province of St. Thomas of Villanova. Welcome to Jesuitical, Father Rob.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Great to be here.
And you're the current provincial, not the prior as in the former.
Not the prior provincial.
Got it. And it's good to be with you. For the folks listening on the podcast, it's a little early. Some would say an ungodly hour. I'm a happily married man now, but when I was in high school, I thought about the priesthood, and I did my first come and see weekend. And when I visited the seminary, they said they had a morning prayer starting at like 6 or 7 or something. So I'm not saying, I think we could solve the vocations crisis if we founded a religious order for people who like to sleep in. I don't know if you get any more recruits to the Augustinians.
It might work. I mean, I know myself, I'm a night owl who has to be up in the morning. That's a bad combination.
Mm-hmm.
And, from everybody in the room, they all got up before the rooster crowed this morning, so we're grateful everybody showed up here today.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the early morning stalled out Zach's vocation to the priesthood, but we want to hear about yours. We are going to, of course, get to the remarkable life of Father Bill Atkinson, but you have a pretty interesting journey yourself, so I want to hear about your vocation. How did you get drawn to the Augustinians as opposed to, say, I don't know, the Jesuits?
It was wonderful listening to Father Peter talk about his relationship with Father Bill and Olivia, who kicked us off with that beautiful song. And thank you to American Media for this wonderful opportunity, and 6 ABC and Bernie Presenica. The gospel encourages us to go out and proclaim the good news. And there's a lot of bad news out there. And so to be a part of a platform where you all are about proclaiming the good news for people who might be searching or wondering how they're going to move forward in their life. It's exactly what Bill had to do on this feast of the Annunciation. It's what Mary had to do as she was called and confused. And certainly for myself, you're 17 years old and you're thinking about what's next, and you're in high school. And my father, who went to bed one night, had a brain aneurysm and never woke up again in his 40s. And at the time, that's really hard on your mom and your 3 sisters, and kind of why God, what's going on here? And I must say, all these many years later, it's really one of the greatest gifts that my father ever could have given me. And that is that life is short, make it count. This is not a dress rehearsal, and really think and reflect about what God might be asking you to do with your life. It happens to be very Augustinian, it's very Jesuit, it's very much a part of the human condition to think about, why am I here? So on the heels of that, I went to Villanova University, and I wasn't really that keen on the fact that it was an Augustinian institution, but it was. And however, I had met an Augustinian who was not at Villanova, but happened to be the uncle of a lot of my high school friends. Jeannie Mullen here is here this morning, and a lot of her siblings. Their Uncle Bill was Father Bill. I hadn't seen him say Mass. I hadn't gone to him for a confession. I would sit in their house at a Super Bowl party, and if you were sitting next to Bill watching the game, he might say something like, "Can I have a chip?" And that just blew me away. That I would have the honor to help feed him. And as Father Peter said, he needed help with everything that you and I just take for granted every day. And what I saw in him was not a man who was bitter, not a man who was resentful, not a man who was complaining, but a man who was filled with joy, who was living his life, who was happy being an Augustinian. He was a teacher, he was a chaplain. He spent his whole life listening to people's problems that were so much smaller than his own. And he had a certain empathy and an ability to listen. I think for so much of his life, he'd be parked in that chair, and he'd either be waiting for somebody to get him out of bed, or waiting for someone to pick him up, or waiting. And so he became really good listener. And so as a young high school kid, long before Villanova, I used to have conversations with this Augustinian. And I knew him as a person and a friend. He was their Uncle Bill, more than I knew him as Father Bill. And the humanity just shined through. And then you would leave yourself asking, how is he doing this? And he had an incredible relationship with the Lord. He had incredible help from his family and his friends. And quite frankly, it inspired me to become an Augustinian. And so, much like Augustine, I put that off. And I said, I'm going to go to law school, and I'm going to make some money, and I'm going to date, and I'm going to make things happen for myself. And so God allowed me to do that. And much like Augustine, who pursued a lot of things that the world has to offer, it's kind of like drinking salt water. It just makes you thirstier. And you think about the things that we all chase, you know, the bigger house, the bigger job, the bigger office, the bigger title, and then you get there and there's no there. And you sense a deep wonder of something, a desire for something more. And so,
did you feel like that was sort of like the last door? You tried all the other doors?
Yeah, I think I got here by process of elimination.
Yeah.
You know, and I think, you know, the God is a patient God, as we heard last Sunday about the fig tree. Mm-hmm. You know, that it didn't bear figs on the first year or the second year, and the owner said, cut it down. But the gardener, who was Jesus, said, no, wait, why don't we just cultivate the soil, pull out some rocks and weeds, and see where we can get? Mm-hmm. And I can remember when my father did pass away, my mom had asked me to clean out his car. And he was a bit of a drinker, and he had some dry cleaning in the trunk. He had a library book that he had checked out that had not been returned. And it was the Confessions of St. Augustine. I didn't know who Augustine was, and I said to myself, this looks like the last book that my father was reading before he passed. I think I'm going to check it out. And I came to know a man who was a sinner before he was a saint, who chased a lot of things that you and I chase, who didn't find his purpose and his fulfillment. And so he kept on searching. And so I kept on searching, and I think ultimately I'm very grateful that I finally kind of acquiesced and relented. And I left the law firm. I left everything that I thought I had worked for. I went back to school, went back to theology, was kind of at the bottom of the totem pole again. And I got to tell you, I've never regretted it.
Were you able to talk to Father Bill about this discernment process?
All the time. Yeah, we would talk. As we said, he was a great listener. He never pushed it. That's what I loved about him. Mm-hmm. And if you met him, and I think that's one of the real interesting things that we have going on here is we're talking about someone who's up for canonization. And I think a lot of times when you think about the saints, you think about people who lived like 300 years ago.
Or in stained glass windows.
Yeah. This is somebody who went to Monsignor Bonner High School. This is somebody who, you know, went around the archdiocese. This is somebody who married a lot of our friends. This is somebody who buried a lot of our friends. And so I sensed a real sense of authenticity that he understood. And you know, when you are ordained, one of the great honors that you have as you go through that ritual is a priest will present you with your stole. That's the garment that the priest wears when he says Mass. And Father Bill presented me with that stole. And it was one of the great honors in my life.
Let's get to Father Bill's biography, if we could, really briefly, because I know he had sort of signed up to become an Augustinian before his accident. Could you just take us back to maybe his high school years and him deciding to become an Augustinian himself.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you've heard that line, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. So Bill had plans, and he went to an Augustinian high school. He's from a wonderful, you know, working class family. He was raised with a certain sense of values. He was a great athlete. He was a good student. As was mentioned, his brother was on his way to the NFL, and he felt called to the priesthood. And so at 18 years old, he did not put it off. He said yes right out of high school. And he went into what we call Augustinian formation. And part of that process is what we call a novitiate. That would be a year of spirituality where you're not in school, where you're away, where you can pray and reflect on, you know, why and how God is calling you to this way of life. And he was up in New Hamburg, New York at the time where our novitiate was. And on February 22nd, 1965, he and his friends were doing what any one of us would be doing on a beautiful snowy day in February. They were tobogganing down a hill, and he was the lead guy in the toboggan, and it went off course, slammed into a tree, and he severed his spine, and from that moment on, he never walked again for the rest of his life.
And how old is he at this point?
He was 18 years old. They didn't think he was going to make it through the night. They cobbled him together, they got him to the hospital, he survived the night. He eventually was taken to McGee Rehab right here in Philadelphia, which is, as you know, is a wonderful institution, hospital for healing and rehabilitation. And he made it through that process. And I think to the surprise of many, he petitioned to continue on in the seminary. And so the Augustinian fathers at the time, you know, granted that request. He went back to school with the help of people like Father Peter and many of my Augustinian brothers. They would get him up in the morning, they would get him to class, they would you know, set him up so he could do his schoolwork, and 6 years later he graduated from Villanova University.
That's incredible. And this is before the Americans with Disabilities Act. You guys were making this up as you went
ramps.
in terms of accommodating.
No ramps, no training. You know, I
incredible.
mentioned his nieces and nephews. I mean, these guys were great. I mean, you think about wellness and what you would do. They would feed him chips, and he'd be in this van, you know, and they just strap the chair into the van, and a lot of times it wouldn't be fastened all the way, and he'd be sliding around in the back of the van, you know, and you'd open up the door and he'd just say, you know, I'm okay, you know, and
take that speed bump a little slower next time, please.
Exactly. So he had a wonderful sense of humor. Yeah. And for somebody who was carrying the weight of the cross that he was carrying, he always had a twinkle in his eye. And he was quoted in this beautiful book, Green Bananas, written by his friend Steve McWilliams, who was a Villanova professor for many years. There's a quote in there. He said, you know, at 6 a.m., I would wake up under the crushing weight of the cross. And by 6:01, God would send someone to help me. And he had a wonderful perspective that he wasn't carrying it alone. And so, you know, if he wasn't, and I'm sure he had his moments, certainly moments of alone time, but he was often the one that people went to for hope and overcoming their problems as much as kind of encouraging him. You looked at Bill and you almost forgot, if I could say, that he was incredibly disabled because he functioned so well. He was a preacher, he was a teacher, he was at everything. And as been mentioned, the letters and the cards and the notes of inspiration. It was mentioned, you know, I don't know if we want to get into this now, but we did exhume his body, because what we've learned, I used to think that the Pope just decides who the saints are. You know, what I've learned is the people decide who the saints are. The people whose lives were touched, who say, and the term they use is, this person lived with heroic virtue. He wasn't just a good guy. He overcame much, and his life reflected the Spirit and the light of Christ to us. And so we thought that this would be a good idea to expose his story and his powerful intercession to more people. Quite frankly, you know, the Augustinians who knew him, his family, we don't need him to be canonized a saint. But what about people 50, 75, 100 years from now who are struggling, trying to overcome some problem in their life, who are tempted to give up? God willing, most of us won't wind up in a wheelchair. But we all get paralyzed. We all get stuck. We all get paralyzed from fear. We get stuck where we can't make a decision, where we can't move forward. And now that he's in our university campus church, people, if you're at a wedding, you're at a funeral, you're at a campus tour, you're a student who's going through a tough breakup, who's got a problem with a parent was just diagnosed with cancer, whatever it is that's weighing you down, you can go in there and sit next to him and take inspiration and strength from his intercession. And what's happening now is we're getting feedback from people who have realized that intercession, that they're writing us back and they're saying, I found peace here. I found strength here. And so we have a website that we've created where people can contribute those stories, and then ultimately, hopefully some of those will translate because the church likes miracles, and we all like miracles.
Yeah.
And I think, quite frankly, the miracle was his life.
Well, I want to go back to this moment where he decides to continue on with his formation to become a priest, because I'm thinking, I'm 18, I'm athletic, brother's going to the NFL, I could do a lot of stuff. God, I'm going to become a priest. So I would be thinking very highly of myself. I think very highly of myself anyway, but that's, and I'm way less impressive than that. I would think that God was going to take care of me.
Yeah.
And for that to sort of flip almost immediately, I can't even imagine sort of the fights I would be having with God sort of in the quiet moments. Do you have any sense what those conversations were like for Bill?
I wouldn't say that was a conversation that was easily resolved. As I understand it, I think he put it took him about 6 months to come to the realization that for 6 months you wake up every morning and you think you're going to walk again. Mm-hmm. And then he started to wake up and realize he was never going to walk again. And I think the real gut check for all of us is he doubled down on his faith. That what do we do when our plans are wrecked? When the expectations that we have for our life, for our children, for our family, for our job get derailed and don't go the way you thought they were going to go. I think, we have free will, right? So the tendency is to be like, you screwed me, God, right? I'm bitter. I'm going to check out. And I think if he was honest, and I know that he had moments, but I think at some point early on, he decided, I'm going to live. And he had a wonderful line later in life, and that is to love the life that God gave you. And I think in this age of social media and FOMO, where all of us, not just the kids, all of us are looking over our shoulder. Mm-hmm. Who got this? Who got that? Who got this blessing? Why does she have what I don't have? Instead of turning it around and looking how much I have. Mm-hmm. And as Father Peter mentioned, to see him live with such gratitude, he actually appreciated where he was. And he didn't just hang in there, he flourished.
One thing that struck me when reading Green Bananas is this idea of choice, because it would seem in his situation that you've basically lost all your choices. All the doors that you thought were open for you seem to be closed. But there's one choice he did have to make, whether to live in resentment or not.
Yeah.
And the fact that he made that choice at age 19 after going through the worst thing you can imagine is, that alone seems like a miracle to me.
Yeah. It's a great point, and we were blessed last October. We offered a symposium. It would be an academic presentation tying it back to Bill's life. And so one of the topics that is now kind of an academic discipline is the spirituality of dependence. And we live in a country where we celebrate our independence. What can you do for yourself? How can you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps? And Bill's life offers us an alternative to that, to actually celebrate our dependence. In the Beatitudes, Jesus is blessed are the poor. Really? We need the poor, and the poor need us, and we need each other. We all found that out in COVID, how much our happiness and our wellness is dependent on one another. his whole life was about dependence. And he did it with grace. He accepted help. And then he was able to then offer other people help who depended on him.
I'm wondering, when someone encounters a tough medical diagnosis, oftentimes the thing that sustains them is the hope of getting better. I think in my own life, the people who've gone through tough diagnosis, that's like the thing you kind of hold on to for a while. And you mentioned, when Bill sort of comes to this realization, maybe for 6 months that was the thing that sustained him, right? If I work hard at my physical therapy, if I follow the treatment, I'm gonna be able to walk again. What do you think that says about where our hope should be placed? That he comes to this sort of bracing, hard stop at a certain point, where this is who I am.
I think what you're touching on there, Zach, is really the theology of the cross. That to be able to come to rise through hardship. What Jesus shows us on the cross is he never came off the cross, and that life isn't about avoiding every storm. It's learning how to dance in the rain. And so Bill accepted his cross with the same grace and strength that the Lord had, and he didn't. He would say, in his way, the way he preached, the way he lived, the way he taught theology, which is all that he did, there was no mistaking from whom he took his strength. And God bless our brother, Father Rich Canuli, because he was a wonderful artist who did this incredible rendition of the stained glass window. But it really struck me in the beginning when I first saw it, because I never saw Bill in that posture. And so,
sort of standing, giving a
blessing.
Standing
well and whole. And I think that Richard really offers us the artistic license to say, no matter how bad and dark things get in your life, that's the resurrection. That we can always rise. And Bill rose. But what I had to wrestle with is that depiction really underplays the suffering that Bill went through. Because once he kind of accepted the fact, got a job, and moved on, the suffering wasn't over for him. I mean, when you're in a wheelchair 24/7, you can imagine the bed sores. And the bed sores that he got so infected, they would go clear through to the bone. He used to sit, and there's a bench in Ocean City on 20th Street that has a gazebo plaque dedicated to him, and people can go and sit there and understand that that's where he used to pray and be inspired by God's creation. But understand that when he sat there unattended, because he liked to just be there by himself, if you went up to catch him, there might be 15 green flies on his face if it was a land breeze and he couldn't swat them off his face. Wow. And the patience and the perseverance and the acceptance of his condition. He and his family will tell you, he almost died probably 20 times in his life because he didn't have the muscles to cough. He couldn't clear phlegm from his lungs. These are the things that nobody would fully appreciate. His siblings and his family would have to bang on the back of his chest so that would loosen up his lungs so he could clear himself. And otherwise he would catch everything that was in the air, cold, virus, and that would put him right back in the hospital. And so many times people thought he was down and out. And I think it was because of his will, his faith, and the good people that he had around him. God bless Christopher Reeve, and he's the one that I think a lot of people recognize in that condition. He lived 15 years in that condition. That's pretty much the lifespan of a quad after the accident. Bill lived for 40. With great doctors, with great nurses, with great family, with his Augustinian brothers, and then all the people, the hundreds of lives and the students that he taught. And I think it's hilarious because here we are, we're canonizing him and we're putting him up there and all the goodness of Bill. When you talk to his students, they say, wasn't that nice to me? And that's how he wrote his thank you notes. He used to write letters and thank you notes. So if you got jug, justice under God, and you were in detention after school, Father Bill would call you up there and you say, all right, take dictation. And next thing you know, you get a thank you note from Father Bill that was written by some guy who had detention at Bonner.
Well, I want to stick on that, because one thing that really struck me and that I appreciated when I was reading about his life from the perspective of Steve McWilliams, who was one of his caretakers for I think 20 years or so, he doesn't airbrush it. He talks about the times where Father Bill got irritated, he was short, he could get angry, and for me that seems like the most natural thing in the entire world. I hate asking for help, so having to be dependent is, I would think, it would take some time to be able to accept that. So I'm wondering if you could talk about how Father Bill got to that place of accepting help.
I have to believe that he really leaned into his faith. When he had lived in this little room in the monastery at Bonner High School for many, many years. And there was this kind of old wooden sign right across from his wall of his bed. So when he would wake up, if he just turned his head, he could read that sign. And it was a quote from St. Augustine. God, help me, give me the grace to do what I can do and the power to do what I cannot. And so there were aspects of his life that Bill really took ownership for, and that he was able through his will and his prayer and his trust to kind of move forward. But then he recognized early on that he wasn't going to be able to do it alone. And so, I mean, there's a whole fraternity of caretakers. There's literally been a reunion of people who cared for Father Bill. Mm-hmm. Just people who came in over the years, who took a morning shift, who took a night shift. I can remember being out with his nephew Tim, and no matter where we were, running around down the shore, doing this and doing that, as teenagers, at 10 of 11, he'd say, I gotta go, because I gotta go put my Uncle Bill to bed. And so by being dependent, he touched the lives of all the people who he allowed to help him. And these are people who didn't just get to know Bill, but they got to know, I think, their higher power, because they could see from whom Bill was taking his strength.
Family and friends obviously played a huge role, but also his Augustinian brothers. I'm curious, from your own perspective, how's this shaped your view of religious life, seeing this radical dependence?
I think, as Prior Provincial, I work very closely with our vocation director. Mm-hmm. And so, we're still alive and open for business. and so we recruit. And I will say that there are a lot of young men and women who are discerning calls to religious life and priesthood. But one of the things that makes me very proud is to point to Father Bill's situation and basically say the Augustinians stood by him and didn't cut him loose. And that was long before I got here.
Because they could have, right?
Absolutely.
We can't take this financial
this
burden.
Is too much for us. The medical, and he lived with us. There was no medical unit at the monastery. Yeah. And so it was a very rudimentary, kind of by the seat of your pants care. And it's just the way he liked it. And as Father said, he wasn't a complainer. And I'm very, he's a point of light for us to say we are a fraternity, that we stick together. We are with each other through not just the good times. We all have fair weather friends. All of us do. And then when the stuff hits the fan, who's with you? And often you can count on one hand. And to look at Father Bill, his whole family, his siblings were so devoted. And the Augustinians. And I think that, as I said, this story and the opportunity that you're giving us to let people know that people don't give up on each other. That just because your expectations and your plans have gotten completely derailed, that doesn't mean that God doesn't have a plan for you. God didn't cause that accident. But he calls us to love through those misfortunes. And that's a really hard thing to do. But when you have somebody that you can point to, like a St. Augustine, like a St. Rita, like a St. Teresa, and hopefully someday like a Father Bill Atkinson.
Yeah, jumping to that canonization process, you mentioned the Pope doesn't make the saints, the people do. I'm curious if there was a story from someone who knew him that really sticks with you and was like, okay, we gotta go through this process, because it's not an easy process to move someone through canonization. It's not cheap, so you got to be committed.
Yeah, and I will say, I think we've advanced this cause long before the stories and powerful anecdotes of intercession. We just believe it, you know, and it's almost like we were saying earlier today. You know, help me believe that I might understand. And you think about things in your life that you go with. It's well beyond what somebody can prove to you. You just have a sixth sense that this is the right thing to do.
Was this when he was alive, or was there?
Oh, no. I mean, I think a lot of people would say to themselves, that guy's a saint.
Yeah.
You know, like we do with a lot of good people in our life.
That's a little different than.
But it was certainly formally established. He passed away in 2006 in our monastery, very peacefully. And in 2017, so 10 years later, a groundswell of people saying, this man impacted my life. And I'll share, anecdotally. I mean, we've got a number of stories, but there is one in particular where, this woman is convinced, and she speaks publicly about it, that she was diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer, and she went all in on her prayers to Father Bill Atkinson, novenas, intercession. She basically said, if you can help me with this, through God's grace. We know that it's always through God's grace. She took inspiration from his resilience, and long story short, her doctors are blown away. They've never seen a PET scan go from what it was to what it became in 10 months. And her testimony is that she's giving that to Father Bill. And so we collect that, we send it over to Rome along with a number of other powerful anecdotes of intercession. And I think our role here is not to decide the validity of the miracles, but it is to continue to promote awareness of the inspirational life of Father Bill so that people can be inspired. This is we got a big 5 crowd here. Take a ride and go sit next to him. And everybody here has an intention, if not for yourself, of somebody that's struggling, that's in some way seems like it's impossible to get over. And when we hear that line in the gospel, nothing's impossible with God, it's nice to have real life experience to say, well, wow, that happened. Because sometimes, we hear the gospel, we go to Mass on Sunday, and it just sounds like a nice story. And when these stories become real, that's when your faith becomes real. And that's when you have kind of a little extra inspiration to continue to persevere or help somebody else persevere.
In addition to all of his talents and vocations, one of the things Father Bill was also a poet, I understand. And you have a poem that you wanted to share with the audience, is that correct?
Thank you, Zach. I would, if it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we said, he had a lot of people take dictation, including his nieces. And after he passed, a lot of his writings were found. And I would submit that this is a poem, but I would submit that it's a prayer. And it's entitled The Strength of Others. How'd you do it? People would say. So confining day after day. Having others around for constant care. Ever wonder if life's unfair? How'd you do it? People would ask. Is it better now than in the past? To see others do what you did before, realizing you cannot do them anymore. How'd you do it? People have said. Needing help in and out of bed. Doubts at times, patience wearing thin. Ever wonder how it will end? How'd you do it? Day after day. The path taken wasn't my way. The choice was another's, not my own. He sent me help. Couldn't do it alone. How'd I do it? Let me confide. Always with others right at my side. Family and friends from the start. Gave me love in no small part. How'd I do it? Day after day. Would not have had it any other way. They shared triumphs and setbacks too. been blessed when I look back and review. How'd I do it? Let me reply. On those who helped me, I totally relied. They taught me to live, not just to cope. With their love, they gave me hope. How'd I do it? Day after day. Help of others, all along the way. Valued friends, sisters and brothers, I simply borrowed the strength of others.
Amen.
All right. Thank you for sharing that, Father Rob. And thank you for sharing your own story and telling us more about Father Bill. We do have one final question that we ask all of our guests on this show, and that is, if you could canonize anyone, living or dead, Catholic or not, fictional or real, who would it be and why?
Father Bill.
I might push you to give one more answer.
I know. If I was really honest about my story, I think I would want to canonize my mom for putting up with me, and I really think she prayed me into the seminary. But as I reflect, and I think Father Peter could attest to this, we had a beloved member of our community. He was the director of admissions at Villanova for many years. He worked on the campus for probably 40 years. He and his wife, Debbie, have 3 children, a beautiful daughter, Anna, and 2 sons, Christian and Nicholas, who were born with cerebral palsy. They needed this kind of help. And he and his wife, Debbie, for 30 years, cared for those 2 in their home every morning. He was a pillar in our community, not a complainer, always had a twinkle in his eye, smile on his face. Both he and his wife both needed hip replacements because of the physical toll it took on them. The joy that they are as a family, the lives that were touched. We celebrated his funeral on campus last year, the outpouring of stories, the impact. You could argue it was a life of heroic virtue. We're very blessed to have known Michael and his wife Debbie, and we, regardless of what the church says, we count on them for incredible intercession for the way they live their life as people of faith.
All right, St. Michael and Debbie. Thanks so much, Father Rob.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you all so much for being here. Before we hand it off over to our hosts, I wanted to invite all of you to join us at our next event here in Philly. We'll be at the National Shrine of St. Rita of Cascia for a Holy and Happy Hour, where we're going to talking to your friends about faith. So we'll begin the Holy Hour of Adoration at 6 p.m. at the shrine, followed by a happy hour and a little panel discussion where we talk about evangelizing today. So we hope all of you will join us.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get a cheesesteak before then, but that'll be my next stop in Philly. But before we hand it back, just a couple thank yous from our team here at America. Thank you so much, Bernie Prezenica, for hosting us here at 6 ABC. Also to Terry and the crew, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. I want to also thank the province, the Augustinian Province of St. Thomas Villanova. Madonna Sutter, thank you so much for all you did to get this together. Thank you, Father Peter, for joining us and for being with us. And also wanted to thank Dan Selecki for all he did, wherever he is. There you go, Dan. And of course, Jimmy Brown. I mean, we could not have done this without Jimmy. I'm lucky to have met you a couple years ago. This has been a long time coming. Thank you so much for all you did. And Father Rob, thank you for joining the podcast and spreading the word.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and with that, I'll toss it back to.
Father Rob, did you want to close with the prayer? I think we have everyone at their seat has a copy of a prayer. If you guys want to participate,
we could say this together.
We could say this prayer together.
The prayer through Father Bill's intercession. If you have your cards there, We'll say it together.
Now, hold on a second, Father Rob. I got to put my glasses on. I'm not.
All right.
Okay, go.
Blessed are you, Father of life, source of goodness and peace, in whom all creation has its origin, and by whom every person is loved. In Father Bill Atkinson, O.S.A., your mercy and compassion were made manifest, as he brought solace to the suffering and hope to the needy. By carrying the cross of life faithfully, he proclaimed confidence in your love, conformity to your will, and so drew others to you and to the generous gift of your grace. Hear our prayers, which we offer through his intercession, so that as your work continues to unfold among us, it may bring honor to you, comfort to your people, and according to your will, glory to your servant. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
And with that, we will conclude the official podcast. I do want to add one thing. It was very kind of Zach to recognize Dan Selecki. Dan, can you come up and kind of close this for us, wrap it up, let's say? And then we have a couple of trinkets for a couple of extraordinary people in our crowd this morning.
Well, it was a wonderful day, Zach and Ashley. Thank you so much, Father Rob, Father Peter, Barney. Thank you for hosting us. November 1st, 1940, this young couple gleefully welcomed the birth of a baby boy. 18 months later, they had their second child, a girl. 6 months from that, December of 1942, the young mother responds to a knock at the front door to be greeted by a Philadelphia police officer, two of her husband's co-workers, informing her that her husband had been killed in a traffic accident while in work that day. Fast forward, the mother now, no husband, no financial income, no real marketable skill set. Her sister, May, who had a job managing at a textile factory in Philadelphia, moves in to be the financial support, sacrifices her life to support this mother and two young children. 1958, this young man has an opportunity to graduate from LaSalle College High School, gets engaged to his grade school sweetheart, is happy, gets a clerical job at Philadelphia Electric Company, goes back to LaSalle High School, at the time was at the university, to run into a Christian brother who became a father figure and mentor to him, Brother Claude. Excited about the news and where he was going in his life, Brother Claude, rather than kind of pat the young man on the back, says, well, what are you doing about college? He said, brother, I don't need college. I have all these things going on in my life. He grabbed him by the arm, kicked the front door to the registrar's office open, sat him down, and said, sign this young man up for 2 evening classes. Fast forward 8 years later, not only did he graduate from LaSalle University now, but also had received his master's from Drexel University. Why do I mention this young man? Why do I mention Brother Claude? Why do I mention Aunt May? Because that man was my father. So we don't know what impact we may have on others by making small tokens of sacrifice. You can change the trajectory not only of an individual's life, but the lives of generations to come. And we sit here and we say, well, how do we do that? It's a pencil. By its nature, in this form right now, it is not intended or useful for the purpose with which it was designed. What has to happen? Needs to be sharpened. Inside of the sharpener is a razor blade. So imagine if this pencil could feel. We all just heard about Father Bill Atkinson, what he had to feel to turn into the purpose that he was meant to be. When we go through situations, it's God telling us we need to sharpen our pencil, folks, because in doing so, we may have the opportunity to be that Aunt May. We may have the opportunity to be that Brother Claude. and we may affect and impact a generation down the road that, who knows, may be inspired to be the next Father Bill Atkinson. I thank you all for your time and presence here today, and may God bless you all.
We made a commitment to get everyone out of here on time, and we are going to hit that goal. I see Bishop Coffey looking at his watch. Wow. Okay. So anyway, I'm not going to ask anyone to stand or walk ahead here, but we have two special pieces of crystal that we put together to celebrate two human beings in this room, and I'll just read the one that I'm responsible for articulating, and that would be a piece of crystal for you, Father Rob. I know you don't like the fuss, but what can I tell you? So the crystal reads, celebrating servant of God, Father Bill Atkinson, American Media podcast at 6ABC TV with today's date, presented to Father Robert Hagan in special recognition of his tireless efforts on behalf of the Augustinian order in the spirit of Father Bill. Here's my favorite part. There's a quote at the bottom that says, it's a St. Augustine quote, to seek the highest good is to live well. What I love about St. Augustine is the simplicity, and not only in which he lived, but in the way he articulated his gifts. So I'm going to just step away from the microphone and let Dan Selecki celebrate our other wonderful recognition this morning.
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy. Yeah, it's not by happenstance, as you can see, and it was mentioned, the beautiful facility that we're in here. Bernie, you've always been, such a gracious host. Any request that we have ever asked for it has always been, how can I help? And absolutely, the answer is yes. So, with that, we want to say, celebrating servant of God, Father Bill Atkinson, podcast at 6ABC Television, March 25th, 2025, presented to Bernie Presenica in collaboration with American Media, in special recognition of his tireless efforts on behalf of our region, serving as President General Manager of 6ABC TV. The only ones among you who will be really happy are those who have sought to serve. So Bernie, again, our deep congratulations.
And with that, our program is concluded, unless, Bernie, you'd like me to sing. Yeah, that's a joke. Thank you, everybody, for being here. By the way, one final note. Think about it. There's 50 people in this room. 50 people in this room. What if every one of you this week, here's an assignment, what if every one of you this week went out of your way to tell the story of Father Bill Atkinson and encourage some generosity and grace in our community? It feels to me like it would be a time well spent in the season of Lent. So anyway, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate your participation.